case Gateway Realty Limited versus Arton Holdings Limited 1991-1992 is a landmark decision in a Canadian contract law, particularly is establishing the duty of good faith in contractual dealings. The dispute arose when Gateway Limited illegally that Arton Holdings Limited engaged in conduct that undermined their contractual relationships, leading to financial harm. The court had to determine whether Arton Holdings' action breached an implied duty of good faith in performance of contractual obligations. Moreover, this case was significant because it reinforced the principle that parties to a contract must act honestly and fairly towards each other. The Nova Scotia Supreme Court explicitly recognized the contractual obligations that are not solely about strict adherence to written terms, but also about maintaining fairness and integrity in their execution. Moving further, the decision influenced later ruling, contributing to the integrity in their execution. The decision influenced later ruling, contributing to the eventual recognitions of the duty of good faith as a general organized principle in Basin versus Arton 2014 by the Supreme Court by Canada. As a precedent-setting case, Gateway Realty Limited versus Arton Holdings Limited paved the way for courts to hold parties accountable for dishonesty or unfair conduct, ensuring that contracts are not merely legal forms but also instruments of fair decisions. Furthermore, the decision in Gateway Realty Limited versus Arton Holdings Limited played an important role in the evolution of contract law, culminating in the Supreme Court of Canada's ruling in Basin versus Arton 2014, which formally established the duty of good faith as a general organized principle. This case marked an early step towards more equitable approach to contractual performance, ensuring that contracts are not only enforceable legal instruments but also mechanisms for fair and ethical business contracts. So now let's move to the facts of the case. Now I am going to discuss some of the facts of the case of Gateway Realty Limited versus Arton Holdings Limited 1991-1992. In this case, the dispute arose from a real estate development agreement between the two parties. Gateway Realty Limited, the plaintiff, was engaged in a development project and had contractual dealings with Arton Holdings Limited, the defendant. The case concentrated on allegations that Arton Holdings act in a bad faith, ultimately causing financial harm to Gateway Realty. The core issue revolved around the defendant's alleged misconduct in fulfilling its contractual obligations. Gateway Realty claimed that Arton Holdings deliberately engaged in actions that obstructed the success of development projects. These actions include interfering with financial arrangements, withholding necessary approvals, and generally acting in a manner that undermined the project viability. The plaintiff argued that such conduct was not only detrimental to their business interest, but also constituted a breach of an implied duty of good faith and contractual dealings. Coming further, as a result, Gateway Realty initiated legal action seeking damages for the losses incurred due to defendants' alleged bad faith. The case was significant because it brought attention to the broader principle of fairness in contract law. At the time, Canadian contract law had not yet fully articulated a general duty of good faith in contract performance. The Nova Scotia Supreme Court ruling in this case helped in the shape the legal understanding of good faith obligations, influencing later cases and ultimately contributing to the Supreme Court of Canada's recognition of good faith as a fundamental principle in Basin versus Arton 2014. Lastly, this case underscored that contractual relationships are not merely about strict compliance with written terms but also about maintaining fairness, honesty, and cooperation between the parties to ensure the proper execution of arrangements.
Hi, in this video I am going to tell about legal issues of Gateway Realty Limited and Arton Holdings Limited. Contractual interpretation. whether the terms of the agreement between the parties had been clearly defined and were enforceable in particularly the interpretation of a property transaction contract was central to the dispute. Second, breach of contract. The issue of whether Arton Holdings had breached the agreement by failing to comply with the terms as outlined in the contract. Third, damages for breach contract. Whether Gateway Realty Limited was entitled to claim damages for the loss suffered due to the alleged breach by Arton Holdings Limited. Fourth, misrepresentation or non-disclosure. Whether there was the misrepresentation or failure to disclose key facts that impacted the validity of the contract between the parties. Thank you. Now I am going to talk about court's decisions. Breach of contract. The court found that Arton Holdings Limited had indeed breached the contract by failing to perform their obligations as agreed. Second, damages. Gateway Realty Limited was entitled to claim damages for the breach. The court awarded Gateway Limited compensation for the loss of they suffered due to Arton Holdings' failure to fulfill the terms of agreements. Contract validity. The court upheld the validity of the contract between the two parties, rejecting the arguments that any misrepresentation or non-disclosure by the Gateway Realty Limited had invalidated the agreement.
Gateway Realty Limited v. Arton Holdings Limited 1991-1992. First, we will talk about the case background. In this case, involved a dispute between Gateway Realty Limited and Arton Holding Limited, where contractual obligations and the principle of good faith were at the center of the legal debate. Gateway Realty Limited sued Arton Holding Limited of acting in bad faith in their contractual deadlines, ultimately leading to losses. Now we will talk about the key legal issues. The first key legal issue was whether good faith should be recognized as an implied obligation in contractual relationship, the extent to which parties must act honestly and fairly in fulfilling contractual terms. Now, the court's reasoning was the Nova Scotia Court of Appeal upheld the lower court's decision, affirming that good faith is an essential component of contractual obligations. The court emphasizes that contractual parties must exercise their rights and perform their duties in a manner that is fair, reasonable, and does not undermine the legitimate interest of the other parties. The legal significance was that reinforced the principle of good faith in contractual deadlines in inflation later and Canadian contractual law developments. The second legal significance was that strengthened judicial recognition of fair deadlining, ensuring that parties cannot exploit loopholes to act in bad faith, and set a precedent for future cases involving disputes over fairness and the assumption of contracts. This case played a crucial role in shaping Canadian contract law, particularly regarding the enforceability of good faith principle in commercial transactions.
Now I am telling about the Gateway Realty and Arton Holidays. The main issue was whether a lease agreement could be enforced despite a lack of normal execution by both parties. The reasoning behind the decision focused on the principle of estoppel. The court ruled that despite the absence of the formal execution of the lease, Arton Holidays was stopped from denying the existence of the lease because it had acted in a way that indicated acceptance of the lease term, taking possession of the property and paying rent. The court held the conduct could be considered as an implied agreement, and Arton Holidays' action created an expectation that it would be bound of the lease. As such, they were stopped from denying the lease existence, even without formal execution. The decision emphasized the importance of parties' conduct and creating binding obligations. Now I am talking about the legal principle established in Gateway Realty and Arton Holidays in 1991 and 1992 include, first of all, estoppel by conduct. A party can be estoppel from denying the existence of a contract or agreement if their conduct implies acceptance of its terms, even in the absence of formal executions. Second, employed agreements. The court recognized that an agreement could be implied from parties' actions, such as taking possession of property and making payments, which suggests an intention to be bound by the term of the lease. And third, reliance on conduct. The case highlights that when a party relies on another party's conduct as though as agreement exists, it may be unfair for the latter to later deny the agreement. The case reinforces that conduct can sufficient to create binding legal obligations even if normal documentation is not completed.
Hi, this is Simranpreet Kaur. In this video, I'm going to explain precedents and influence of Gateway Realty Limited versus Arton Holding Limited. Gateway Realty Limited versus Arton Holding Limited established a significant precedent in Canadian contract law, emphasizing the implied duty of good faith in contractual performance. The case reinforced that parties must act honestly and reasonably, fulfilling obligation in a manner consistent with the contract's intended purpose. It also highlighted the failure to use best effort to lease a property, breaching the agreement. The ruling influenced subsequent cases by clarifying the scope of good faith obligations, ensuring that parties do not engage in actions that undermine the contract's core purpose, and shaping modern interpretation of contractual duties in Canada. Now I will tell you broader implications of Gateway Realty Limited versus Arton Holding Limited. Gateway Realty Limited versus Arton Holding Limited has broader implications for Canadian contract law, particularly in shaping how courts interpret the duty of good faith. The case emphasizes that parties must act honestly, reasonably, and fairly in fulfilling their contractual obligations, even when not explicitly stated in the agreement. It influences how businesses and individuals approaches contract negotiations, reinforcing the importance of transparency and fairness. Additionally, the decision impacts disputes regarding implied duties, encouraging more proactive efforts to uphold contractual terms. The case has prompted ongoing discussions about evolving the rule of goods in faith in Canadian legal relationships. To conclude, in Gateway Realty Limited versus Arton Holding Limited, the court reinforced the importance of implied good faith in contractual performance. It concluded that Arton's failure to make reasonable effort to lease the property, despite the lease agreement's effort clause, constituted a breach of good faith. The ruling emphasized that parties must act honestly, reasonably, and in accordance with the contract's purpose. This decision shaped Canadian contract law by clarifying that good faith is an essential element in fulfilling obligation, and that failure to do so can lead to significant legal consequences such as contract termination. Thank you.
Now we will move towards the Q&A slide. The Q&A overall overview involves the first question, which says, what is the case about? The answer for this question is that this case involves a contractual dispute where Gateway Realty Limited sued Arton Holdings Limited of acting in bad faith, leading to financial losses. The second question is, which court heard the appeal? The Court of Nova Scotia heard the appeal in this case. The third question is that what was the main legal issue? The main legal issue for this case was good faith. The fourth question is what was the court's decision? The court affirmed the trial court's decision, reinforcing that good faith is an essential component of contractual obligations. The fifth question is what was the court's reasoning? The court held that parties must act honestly and fairly in fulfilling contractual terms and cannot undermine the other party's legitimating interest. The last question is why is this case important? The ruling strengthened the enforceability of good faith principles, sharing future Canadian contract law and reinforcing fair dealing in contractual relationships. Thank you.